Call this meeting to order, 10 a.m., Thursday, February 27th, 2025. We're here for a presentation on the Moon Pass Tunnels and Trestle project, and I'll turn it over to you, whatever else.
Perfect. So we have geoengineers here. They are the lead on the design for our project, and then Amanda Lamont from LTAC as well. They have they administer the funding, and Amanda's been a great middle person to keep things moving along. So we've got a good team of people going on here. So I will let Geo take it away.
Sure. Awesome. Thank you. I see you've already got a copy of the report printed out. I did print out some brief summaries, essentially, if anybody needs one. This is the executive summary, some site plans, and some of the cost tables. Just wanted to kind of hit some of the high-level stuff so that everybody could follow along if needed. Would you like a copy of this? Yeah. Okay.
I'll take one.
Yeah. Do you have one? Yes.
Sure.
Okay.
If you have an extra, if not, no worries.
And one for you?
Sure.
All right.
Thank you.
Perfect. Appreciate you guys taking the time to meet with us today. I don't know where to sit here. If I should sit right here, this will work. We just kind of wanted to go through where we're at on the Moon Pass Tunnel and Bridge Repair Project, kind of give you an update on status, and then give you a chance to ask any questions, any feedback you may have on the concepts that we put forth, and kind of hear your voices. I'll start off by introducing myself, since none of you have really met me. Morgan MacArthur. I'm Principal Geotechnical Engineer at Geoengineers. Been with Geo for 19 years. I work out of my satellite office, which is basically my house in Athol. And I go into our Spokane office. We have a physical office in Spokane a couple days a week. And then I also manage our Boise-based geotechnical group. So I'm in Boise 2 or 3 times a month. To kind of go where I need to go for the project, basically. And Andy?
Yeah. Andy Canaday, engineering geologist. I'm based out of our Seattle office, but I spent a lot of time in Idaho and all over the country, actually. I've been doing this about 25 years, 7 years at Geoengineers. I specialize in rockfall tunneling, particularly rock tunnels, and landslide mitigation. And so this project was right up my alley. I'm excited to be a part of it.
And I'll introduce myself too, just because I don't think we've met. Unfortunately for you, maybe gotten to meet you quite a few times. I'm up here fairly
That's always
often.
been good news.
That's true. I've got a good track record with Shoshone County. I'm Amanda Lamont. I'm an engineer with LTAC, that's Local Highway Technical Assistance Council, and we administer the federal funds on local projects across the state. This one is funded through Western Federal Lands, and just a nice reminder, there is no match from the county on this project. So this is the best kind of grant where it's 100% federal funded. I know our federal highways partner, Ed Miltner, he's the state bridge engineer and does a lot of work in Montana, also was highly instrumental in helping the county put this application together and helped convince, or was, really involved with making sure that there was funding for this, because we recognize that these assets are aging, and if any of them were to go out of service, it really changes the dynamic of the usage of this entire region. So he's been helping us throughout the process. Normally we don't have as much engagement with federal highways, but because we don't have a lot of tunnel assets in the state of Idaho, we don't have a lot of expertise. And so he's been really helpful in, reviewing everything, giving guidance, working his angles at Western Federal Lands, doing everything we can to make sure that we can save and extend the life of these tunnels.
And I'll do a little introduction too. So I'm Jim Roletto. I'm a sub-consultant to Geo. I've been with the county for about 17 years, and we've been working on these tunnels off and on through emergency projects, our own forces, or RAT grants. And so I am the one that did put the application together. Several of your work directors ago, and so been chasing it along. But I bring some of the history of what we've done, what's worked, what hasn't from the construction side. And so, anyway, also kind of the local guy, the Wallace guy, who's up here usually weekly, and for some of that communication that goes on and some of the, it's technical stuff when you bring in geotech engineers, and so sometimes I play a little role in a lot of that, and we work with LTAC an awful lot. So, just for what for sure.
And our goal with the report, hopefully you had a chance to review it or give it a high-level overview, at least pass through the executive summary. But our goal was to make it digestible, not too technical, but really give you a feel for what some of the hazards are that we've identified with the tunnels, the bridge, some of the rock slopes at the portals, and then what we think needs to be done to mitigate those hazards. So I'll dive into the presentation, unless there's any questions. Okay, and I guess we did want to make this pretty informal, so if anything comes up during the process of the presentation, feel free to jump in and ask any questions you might have. So we'll start off with project overview. Hopefully everybody knows where Moon Pass is. It's a critical route for the county and the community. It's got a lot of users, recreational users and non-recreational users. It's an emergency route from Wallace here over to Avery. But then we've also got folks accessing the Hiawatha Trail system. We've got hunters using it recreationally, and others. So it's an important route. Portions of the route, including all of the tunnels, the bridge, 20404 is the key number for the bridge, and then the slopes at the tunnel portals are all experiencing varying levels of deterioration. And Jim alluded to that. It's been a problem for a while, and there've been some emergencies over the years. So there's just varying levels of disrepair and damage. So where we're at right now in the project is phase 1. That's kind of the concept mitigation report that we put together. And really what we did as part of that is assessing the structural and rockfall related hazards, prioritizing some of those hazards based on the level of risk associated with the hazards, putting together cost estimates for mitigation measures, basically what can we afford within the budget that we've got. And Amanda mentioned the FLAP grant that this was funded through. That's the Federal Land Access Program. There's a no match. It's about $7.5 million that's been identified for construction phase. There's another portion that's set aside for the design phase. So that's where we're at right now. Next phase that we'll roll into, provided you all are on board with the approach that we're taking here, is the design phase. And we'll scope that once we've got a handle on what exactly the concept is and where we're headed with it, so we can know exactly what it is we're designing. Then we'll roll into construction. Construction phase is envisioned for 2027. So here's a vicinity map. It's a little bit hard to see on the TVs there, but let's see if I can get a little pointer here. Where's the pointer? Okay. So this is where Moon Pass comes down. Wallace is up off the screen this way. Ties into the Hiawatha Trail system right here. Here's tunnels start at 30 on the north end and down to 36 as you approach Avery. And then there's another tunnel, 37, here further down the system, down the St. Joe with that. So a little bit about site history, and you're probably already familiar with this, so I'll hit it at a high level. But it is a historic railroad route. All of the construction was completed in 1909. It was used for a long time, but closed. The final train cars passed in 1980. It was originally built by Chicago, Milwaukee, and Puget Sound Railroad, and you can still see the stamps from some of the on some of the tunnel portals that say CMMPS on there, and that's what that is related to. After closure, the route was repurposed as a trail system and road. So that's the Hiawatha Trail and then the Moon Pass portion. And then so some of the tunnels are kind of a mixed bag of lined and unlined portions. Theoretically, the portions that are lined were lined because it needed to be lined during construction process. They had weaker rock conditions, right? And so that as they're tunneling through here, they're realizing, oh, it's starting to collapse or whatever. We need to put in a liner system. So those portions of it are lined with a concrete liner, and then there are unlined portions as well. Mentioned over time, some deterioration has collapsed. There's been concrete spalling within the lined portions. There's been some portal damage. The head wall collapse in 2022 that Jim alluded to that was reconstructed at this is the east portal for Tunnel 34. And then there's been some rock fall both within the tunnels and at the portals, with kind of rock slips approaching the portals. So in 2021, this has been mentioned, but the county and the Forest Service applied for the FLAP grant with the help of Federal Highways, and that was awarded. Real quick, just photos of each of the tunnel portals, starting at the north end on the right, the lower right there, Tunnel 30, and working our way further south, closer to Avery. Don't need to go into too much detail here, just kind of orienting you to which tunnels are which, because we will talk a lot about different repairs in different tunnels, and it's just kind of a reference of orientation point. And here you can see this is the rebuilt tunnel portal at Tunnel 34 that Jim mentioned. And then there's Tunnel 37 further down the line. So we'll talk a little bit about the evaluation and prioritization process. Started off by assessing existing conditions and historic performance. That is, we've gone out and done reconnaissance evaluations of the insides of the tunnels, the portals, the slopes approaching. Also recognizing a lot has been done historically. We reviewed some of the historic work, historic assessments, and inspection reports by ITD, both for the tunnels and the bridge. And then we did an initial reconnaissance, but then also did a more thorough inspection of each one of the assets, really identifying what are the hazards, and then what is the risk level associated with those hazards, breaking it up, boxing it into high, moderate, and low risk. And that's really risk to the public for the most part. And then hopefully, yeah, you can probably read that. So we put in the hazard level matrix here that we were going with, really focusing on like the frequency of potential failure, how often this might happen, right? What is the likelihood of it impacting the roadway and users of the route if they were in harm's way at the time of that impact, right? So that's kind of how we broke out high, moderate, and low priority.
Mm-hmm. I'll just add as well, our structural sub DEA did a full LiDAR scan of every tunnel. And the purpose of that was to provide a benchmark for future inspections. And you can see at the end of the report, there's some 11 by 17 pages with the scans on there. And they just allow us to kind of note the areas of deterioration and seeing how those progress over time. So ITD does an inspection, biannually of all the tunnels. And so it's a good way to have a base map to record that additional deterioration on. It's also a really good way if ITD or Shoshone County or LTAC, there's funding to do additional LiDAR scans. You can actually do a differential process where you can look and see if the tunnel is actually moving in. So it's a good monitoring effort, and so that was also done as part of this.
Also, one thing that I think is real important for the commissioners, when decision matrix, I think, are important, so I really like it. Some of the people ask you, why this one, not that one? What are you doing here? What are you doing there? And so to have something that you can look at and be able to answer that. This is high in this, but low in this, but really important in this. And somehow you come up with why is this more important than the other. Mm-hmm. And their job is to make sure we get that too. So you can have that in your desk drawer. If someone calls you up and says, you got the wrong one. You say, no, this is how decisions were made. And so it's a function we started years ago. It's a really good one. So
yeah, that's a really good point. It helps you tell the story about why we selected the repairs that we've selected, and maybe some that might, from the surface, look like it's a clear problem. Why didn't we fix that, right? And it tells the story about why, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And these, I'll just add, these hazard assessments were done using recognized national standards. So, they're repeatable. They help sort of quantify, in a sense, the hazard and the risk. So it takes some of the bias out of the analysis.
Yeah. I'm going to hand it over to Andy to take over and start talking about some of what we saw out there.
Yeah.
You want to share your
I'll just
thoughts,
let you drive. Okay. It's probably easier.
Okay.
Just a few slides coming up, really just to give you a really quick sample of kind of some of the deterioration we saw out there, followed by some of the mitigation options we have suggested as ways to move forward. So what you're seeing here are a couple areas within Tunnel 34. This is the 33, thanks. This is what we call a high hazard on the left. You can barely see the rebar being exposed in that spall area. A lot of seepage. What that seepage does, and the reason you see spall in these areas of seepage is because the seepage comes down. In the winter it freezes. It mechanically breaks up the concrete, and then in the spring that falls. It could fall on a gravel, a couple pieces of concrete coming down. It can also fall on a fairly substantial chunk. The reason we consider this particularly to be a high hazard is because it's in the crown, which means it has the ability to fall directly onto a car. On the sidewall there, that's a moderate hazard only because it's on the sidewall. When it falls, there's still space that enables it to fall without striking or impacting hikers, bikers, cars. So that's sort of how we, with the tunnel liners, how we sort of differentiated between high and moderate hazard. Next slide. Here's another example, Tunnel 30, kind of a moderate level spall on the south wall. Again, that doesn't create a huge hazard for the traveling public. It's something that over time is going to get worse. If it can be fixed with the funding, then great. If not, it's not a huge hazard. Tunnel 37, this is an example of efflorescence, which is basically leaching of the concrete onto the liner. It can denote where you have seepage, and it often is associated with cracking, relatively minor cracking. This is a low hazard, at least at this point. It's an area that we would keep track of long term to ensure things aren't getting worse, but not a significant hazard at the moment.
Just one thing to add here. This is kind of what I was talking about and what Jim was alluding to, where, if we aren't able to fund the repair of spalls on the walls of the tunnels, like that one on Tunnel 30, people might see that and be like, oh, well, you spent all this money repairing the roof. Why didn't you fix this while you're at it, right? And hopefully this helps provide the story behind that. Same thing with Tunnel 37. In the winter, you've got these big icicles coming because it has a bunch of seepage ports in the crown, and it forms big icicles in the winter. And it's visible to local residents because there's houses nearby, and that's the one that's probably the most accessible in the winter out of all of the tunnels, right? And so people can see that, and they might be like, oh, well, you guys fixed all these other tunnels, why aren't you fixing this icicle problem? Well, it's not really like a huge hazard. It might look bad, but it's not really a hazard to the public, right?
Yeah, so some examples of the unlined sections. This is Tunnel 33. I won't get into a ton of detail, but you can kind of see, if you look, some of the fractures in the rock and how they form. We consider this area to be a relatively high hazard because those slabs in the ceiling have the potential to fall down on the cars. It's one of those low probability but a high consequence type of event. So this is an area where, as I'll get into the later mitigation, where we want to do something about this potential rockfall hazard to keep the public safe. And then just an example of the deterioration we saw on the bridge. On the left, we have abutment 1. There's a very noticeable crack, and that crack actually extends into the footing, which is a big concern for us because that is the loading area of the footing. So this is an area that we definitely want to fix. On the abutment 2, we have some deterioration of that abutment. However, that is not currently a loaded portion of the footing, so we're not as concerned. That would be a moderate hazard. So that's just sort of, again, the difference between some areas why we're fixing them and then areas why we're recommending not to pursue that.
And that one on the left, that's a pretty serious issue, and one of the few things benefiting here, the reason it hasn't needed to be addressed yet, is because that was designed for railroad loading, right? So it's a lot heavier loading. So it just had a little more forgiveness in damage to the abutment there before it really needed to be addressed. But at this point, it's getting pretty critical.
And then here's just an example of kind of some of the typical rockfall hazards we see at the portals. And this, we didn't really talk about this, but there was an initial assessment done on these tunnels by Shannon Wilson back in 2021, 2022. And one of the things they didn't address were the portals, and that was FHWA came back and said, look, we actually have some pretty serious problems that we would like to try to address with this funding as well. So we took a really close look at the actual rock slopes adjacent to the portals. Again, won't go into a ton of detail, but you can kind of get an idea with the chute. It just sends rock right down. Also not a great place to sit. But we wanted to take a close look at the size of the rocks at that particular location. But there's also some pretty, this is a relatively manageable situation with the chute. You can put up above some barriers, but there are also some pretty significant blocks that we've tried to outline that are potentially unstable. And those are something that we would highly recommend stabilizing, and we have recommended to do that because in some cases along this at these portals there are areas where you can catch this rock and it'll sit in the ditch and it's not a huge issue, mostly a long-term maintenance. But if one of these larger blocks came down, you could potentially block the road. You could do some significant damage to a car. And so these are some of we're not going to solve all the problems at these portals, but we do want to try to reduce the risk as much as we can with the available funding. I think this is a good illustration of, we have a very, very long road we're dealing with. Each year you probably get rocks and stuff coming down. We had a pretty large rock slide event a couple years ago that we're currently working on. we can't solve all the problems in the world. There's going to be rock that continues to come down. We just want to reduce that hazard to as much as we can, focus in those dollars at mitigation where we can. So, yeah, I think that's it.
Another thing I wanted to mention here, and it might have been, I didn't mention it earlier. One of the things we did as part of our existing conditions or historic performance assessment is we talked to the public works maintenance crews and had them out there and walk the site with us and just at least get anecdotal stories about, have you had a lot of issues cleaning up rock here? Have you had any issues here? Like, how often do you have to push rocks out of the way? How big are the rocks that come down that you've seen that you have to push out of the road? That kind of stuff. So that was also part of our investigation.
So just to clarify, on this one, you're recommending stabilizing, not removing?
So what, I'll get to that, but yeah, it's a great question. This would be a combination of a number of different things. The first thing we would do is scale, and that basically means there's going to be guys on the slope picking off all the loose stuff, bringing it all down, then they're going to take away that, reestablish your ditch, and because that's going to provide catchment for future rockfall. And then some of these larger blocks you see, we'd like to stabilize those with rock bolts.
Okay.
Make sure that those big ones don't go anywhere, because when the big ones go, they expose more rock that can then deteriorate and come down again. So hopefully get those big ones down. And then I can't remember exactly, but we'd probably also in that chute recommend some new barriers at the bottom. Those are pretty beat up. And then possibly even what we call a suspended cable net. And what that does is when rock comes down, it slows it down and takes the energy out of it, and then takes it down to the catchment area. And a relatively cost-effective way to reduce that risk.
Mm-hmm. Also keeps it from potentially bouncing if it's coming down, tumbling.
Bounce over those barriers, right. and yeah. So that would be for this particular site. Those would be my recommendations for fixing. And each site's a little bit different. Sometimes that chute, that'll be directly above the portal. In which case, rocks come down, they go over the portal and they drop right into the road. You need a different solution there because you don't have the catchment built in. That might be more of a stabilization effort up at the top of that chute. That might be building the head wall a little bit higher to provide more of a catchment and direct the rocks away. Each site's a little bit different, a new challenge, but we have a number of different tools at our disposal to mitigate. All right, so this is just a quick summary of sort of where we think the higher priority repair mitigation measures, where should we direct our priority essentially for the high areas. So that the scale all tunnels and approaches, that was the first thing I sort of talked about at that one portal. We would do that at all the portals and throughout all the tunnels. And what that would do is, again, the portals, that would bring down all that loose rock. In the tunnels, they would take crowbars and pry off the loose concrete. In the unlined sections, all the loose rock in there, they take that all down. And then, that is probably the most cost-effective way to reduce your hazard. Now, it's a short-term hazard, though, reduction, right? Because those processes are still at work. The seepage coming through, the freeze-thaw action on that rock, all of those within 5 years, you might be back to about where you were before. So it's a really good way to, in the short term, reduce that hazard. But then we'd also want to, the second is to add signage. This is just to notify the public if you're entering an area where we have rockfall, be on the lookout, drive a little slower. If there's rocks in the road, slow down. You don't want to damage your car. And just be on the lookout. This is also a really good way for the county to protect themselves. You've warned the public that this is an area we need to be concerned about. The next highest area is Tunnel 34 liner crown. Now this is a full replacement. This is one particular tunnel where the deterioration was significant enough for us to be concerned that if it was to continue, you may have a liner tunnel collapse. And so that rose up as one of the more specific high priority areas to fix. You'll note that it says liner crown. This is an expensive fix. So we broke it up into kind of the high hazard being the crown replacement and a moderate hazard being the sidewall replacement. Ideally, if the bids come in as we think they will, we can do that whole section from, in this case, it's from station 0 to station 80, about 80 feet of the tunnel liner, replace that entire tunnel liner. Right now, we think we have the funding to do that. So I note that because that is the one moderate priority item that we would try to fund in this project. Mm-hmm. Because it makes a lot of sense. It's way more efficient to just replace that entire liner than just the ground.
It's worth noting that that's the portion of the tunnel 34 that's closest to the head wall that collapsed. Yep. So it's a larger scale problem than the emergency repair was able to fix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Item number 4 was that big crack in the abutment 1 footing. I think that's a pretty high priority to fix. And then kind of what I was getting at with the scaling being a short-term approach, installing the weep holes in the crown is another high priority area because that is going to actually reduce your long-term deterioration of the concrete. If we can get that water out, beyond, past the rock, past the liner, and out, it doesn't have the ability to seep into that liner and freeze and start breaking it up. So it's a really good way of slowing down the deterioration process. 6 is install the liner in tunnel 33 unlined section. That was the tunnel I showed you that example of with the interesting fractures in the slabs. That would consist of pattern bolts and shotcrete. I'll have an example of that, what that kind of looks like. And then we've also identified some of the approaches for tunnels 32 west, 33 west, 34 east, and 36 east, which have the most significant rockfall hazards. So we would, as part of this project, mitigate those approaches with some of the mitigation measures that I mentioned. And then number 8 is repair the concrete liner crown portal head walls for all the tunnels. So this is for all the lined sections, those areas of spall in the crown and then directly on the head wall, all those areas that have the ability to fall, deteriorate down onto traffic. We want to fix those. That's a smaller scale fix. That's just a patching versus the full replacement that we do in tunnel 34. And then the last high priority item was to replace the head walls, similar to what we did at 34 East. We'd want to do the same similar idea in tunnels 30, 32, and 34 West.
So that would involve taking the old one out.
Yes, rebuilding it. Yeah. These are sort of the moderate priority repair areas that we identified. Tunnel 34 liner walls, again, that was the full replacement that we'd like to include in this project, just because we're already doing the crown. And then number 2 would be some additional rockfall mitigation at some of the approaches. 3 would be to install liners in the other 2 unlined tunnels. That would be 35 and 36, similar to what we would do at tunnel 33. And then another thing we found in some of the tunnels was some pretty significant cracking. Again, we don't think that's a major or a high hazard because it's cracking. It doesn't, it's not actively spalling down. It's typically in the sidewalls. But given additional funds, we could potentially mitigate that. And then 5 is to do that patching on liner walls. Again, moderate hazard, doesn't have the direct ability to fall on the cars, but if additional funding allows, we would like to stop that deterioration in the tunnels. And then the last one is to extend the Tunnel 33 West Portal. It's not a rebuild, it's just an area where the rock slope is migrating away from the portal. We just like to close that, prevent rocks from being able to continue to kind of funnel down. So it's not a high priority area, but again, additional funding allows for it. Yeah. Really quickly, I'll just kind of go through some potential mitigation options. On the left, this is just a real typical section view of a concrete repair. They'll saw cut out the deteriorated concrete, reinstall rebar reinforcement, and then place a new concrete patch over it. So that was what you would see in the crown for the concrete repair or the sidewalls. This is just an example again of the Tunnel 34 head wall replacement. Something I wanted to note here is that this was an emergency repair. In the case of this project, it's not an emergency project, so it does need to go through SHPO, which is the Historic Preservation Organization. They have already expressed some concerns that the concrete work needs to match the historic appearance of the original work.
Like shabby and falling down.
Kind of.
It looked pretty good.
I know. So that, we don't know exactly what that's going to entail. It could literally be something as simple as just having the wood imprint in the concrete to make it look like how they used to do it. It could mean a lot of things, but we'll continue to work with SHPO once we get into final design and work out those kinks. But it's one of those things where we have to keep them happy.
Yeah, and we already are in their good graces because we met with them on site when SHPO was up here in North Idaho. I think Morgan was there. I think we were there too, Jessica, weren't you? And just ask them, like, what do you think? And we really wanted to show them, like, look how deteriorated these are. Every dollar we spend on board forming, or, one of their biggest concerns is not having interstate gray portals. They want it to look aged, which is a fairly easy thing to accommodate. Pick something that's something more in line with something that looks like it was made at the time. And so we really wanted to just hear from them and let them feel like they could see what we're up against and that we have a limited budget, because it's really up to them. If these are historic, they're historic features. And if we have what's called an adverse effect, so if we have a negative impact on that historic feature, then there's like this massive process and hoops to jump through and reports and legal reviews and just a lot of money so our goal was, what can we do to not get an adverse effect? We recognize we still want to retain some of the historic integrity and have that feel and preserve that, while also understanding that while also understand that there's a lot of need and we're already prioritizing against other things. So I think we're in a good place with them because the Forest Service has been doing a bunch of tunnel work and the Forest Service hasn't been coordinating with them. So they're like, wow, you guys are doing a great job. We're so appreciative. And so I think, because of our ongoing communication and coordination with them, there's some relatively low cost things that we can do to keep them happy. And honestly, it is an asset. It is an asset that drives a lot of tourism. And if we remove that historic integrity, it doesn't have the same feel as when you bike through, you can see the stamped CM PS, and you can see the dates, and you can see everything. So, I think some of their requests were on the portals, colored concrete, if we can stamp it so it looks like it's board form, because you can see that now. Like, if you go to these tunnels, when you look at them, you can see where the boards were when these were constructed in the early 1900s. So it's something that it's a challenge that we have to just mitigate, but they hated that one. I think it's funny that that's the picture. And that's what we said. Well, if you're going to give us an adverse effect and we have to jump through all these hoops, they're all going to look like that. So we had a little bit of, we don't want to play that game, but, there's going to be some work, and it's mutual. We all want it to look nice. We want it to look and feel like they're historic features, but not waste a lot of money doing that.
Yeah, I concur with everything she said. But just so you know, that was actually shotcreted and then kind of carved knife down. So that's, when you look at that, you wonder how to do that. It was shotcreted and then knifed.
How thick is that shotcrete?
Well, there were fairly deep, and part of the money we had is you try to get the delaminated, the stuff that wants to pop out, so you keep shooting it back and banging that stuff off, and you keep going further in and further in. But so at times, we're over a foot, and sometimes but you just go back and forth, But anyway, we went quick. We did it right. We got it together. We put a little 34 in there. We thought we made them pretty happy with that.
The font looks the same.
I had heard about it. I didn't think it was as bad as they, but
It's typical though. And
they did not like it.
Yeah. I am not for playing those kind of games, but you have to play the game with it. Will grind it all up.
Yeah.
So they're doing the right thing, and I don't think the fix, you said it, is that expensive.
It's not. Yeah, and our kind of what our takeaway was, we're like, well, if we're doing that, we agree. It's on the portal. You can see it. But inside the tunnel, we're doing shotcrete, and we're not going to stamp anything inside the tunnel. It's dark, it's unlit. They didn't like it, but they're on board, more or less on board with that. Instead of shotcrete, they'd rather have netting, so we'll look at that, like a mesh, then like on the unlined portions, then you can at least still see the rock, so if it's just picking mesh instead of shotcrete, like we're open to that. If so it's a little bit of a give and take, but
Totally.
I can see it on the portals, like on the where that's really what you see when you're outside, and they want that to, if it's just putting some color in there and stamping it, it's not that bad when compared to the hoops you have to jump through if they were to say, yep, that's an adverse effect.
Yep.
Another thing to mention on the liner replacements. Maybe a simpler or less intrusive solution is to basically place a new liner inside the existing liner. And that's something that we wanted to try to avoid because we know these are already narrow tunnels, single lane. We don't want to take away any more space. It's not like we've got big trucks going through there or anything, but it's still, we'd like to maintain the width and the size of the tunnels as they currently are.
Yep. Yeah, let's go on to the next. So here's an example of what it might look like if we did a shotcrete solution in the unlined sections of the tunnel. The other alternative would be to do a mesh, and it allows you to see the bit of the rock. There are some trade-offs. The shotcrete solution is a little bit more robust, a little bit more. There's less corrosion concerns with the mesh. Eventually, that system, it's probably 50-year life on it. It's high tensile. It's galvanized mesh, but eventually, it's going to corrode, and you'll have to do some maintenance. Whereas a shotcrete solution's a little bit more robust and long term. Not that you might potentially have some areas of seepage to come through and spall, but it's typically, if you do it right, it's a very, very long-term solution. So we'll work with SHPO on that, and just let them know the positives and the negatives of each potential solution.
You
But
could just tell people to keep their lights off in the tunnel so they
If only it were that
Hopefully
easy.
good solution.
exactly. Exactly. And then,
Oh, did you want to back that? Sorry.
no, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Again, just really, really brief. Here's a typical sign you might see to warn folks. On the right, you can barely see them. Those are little plates and bolts.
You talking about in here? Or?
Right,
there,
I know you
right
get.
there.
Yeah, you see it?
No.
Right there.
There,
Oh,
yeah.
Right there.
So-
there they are.
We usually put a little quick stain on them. They're all still galvanized, but this Natina stain, you barely see them. So from an aesthetic standpoint, like that's worth the cost because you're never going to see them. That little gap there as well, that's actually shotcrete. That's stained shotcrete. And that was a shear zone that was working its way back and undermining the blocks that we bolted. So we just put some weep holes and some bolts and sprayed shotcrete, and then they just came in with a really quick spray. Done. You can't even see it. It looks really nice. So those are really easy ways to kind of make the SHPO happy, the Forest Service happy, and yeah, the tourists are just never going to see it. There are some more intrusive mitigation measures like the cable nets and stuff. Again, we can get those colorized, so it's harder to see. But yeah, just some quick examples of things we can do to make things look a little bit more aesthetically pleasing while doing the job. All right, I think it's you now.
Yeah. So moving on to the estimated costs for the repairs here. I mentioned before we've got a construction phase budget that's just about $7.5 million. So what we've done is we didn't really specifically say it, but when we talked about the high and moderate priority repairs, those were in order of priority. That's why they had numbers next to them. So what we've done here is based on the estimates that we've put together, we think that we can do all of the high priority repairs and also repair the number one of the moderate priority repairs, which is the wall sections of Tunnel 34 within the planned budget. So that's what our base mitigation option here includes. Everything that Andy talked about in the high priority plus the walls for Tunnel 34. And as you can see, our budget there about $7.4 million. So that's what we're estimating. But we also recognize that sometimes costs can come in higher or lower than anticipated. In the case that they came in higher, which we really hope isn't the case, but we'd have to start shaving off some of the lower priority items in our prioritization order, right? In the case that they come in lower, or in the case that maybe some additional funding is found, we put together packages of kind of logical groups of things that we could add in to get contractors to at least bid on, so that we know if we have an opportunity to bring that into the project as well. And that's what options A, B, C, and D are here on this table. These are things that could easily be kind of a little package that adds into the kind of an add alternate bid, essentially, right?
And I'll just add on that it's our understanding that there will be no additional funding available. So I think you should assume that we will not get additional funding. If for some reason that does become available, we're ready to act very easily with how we plan to bid this. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was clear that 7.5 is our number. That's what we're working with. That's what we're planning on. And if somehow we get lucky, we get some more, then we'll go that route.
And the options that you've listed are in order of importance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have any options for $1 or $2? All the options.
Yeah.
Price.
Yeah, at the advice of FHWA, we packaged them in roughly $1 million chunks. Some of them we just can't. It's kind of all or nothing. You don't just do part of the tunnel, you got to do the whole thing. So that's what we tried to do. So option C is the only one where you just couldn't really break it down any further. So,
and once we have a contractor on board, it's possible that we can say, okay, well, things are going well. Here's the budget, whatever. Here's a few other little things that we could tack on that would not necessarily be one of those packages, but we could shoehorn it in to the budget or whatever, essentially.
Yeah, because things like scaling is a guess. It could be a lot less, it could be a lot more. Hopefully this has a heavy contingency in there because every rockfall project, which is not very many, but of all of them I've done, they're always over budget. Like Smith's Ferry to Round Valley with ITD, classic example.
Yeah.
That was like 1,000% over budget. I'm exaggerating, but you just don't know once you start opening things up, all of a sudden you find more. And so you just really don't know. And then as far as budget, it's the folks that govern the Western Federal Lands Funds. It's a combination of one person from Western Federal Lands, one person from LTAC, our administrator, and one person from ITD. And so they pretty much are the ones that decide, where funding goes and all that. But there's been a lot of changeover in who makes up that group. And so maybe some of the things that were said in the past, which is this project will not get any more money, if there's an opportunity, it's a possibility. But Federal Highway just wanted to make sure that it's not something we're going to expect. But we want to be primed so that if there is any shred of funding, we will be here to say, yes, we can use it, and here's how. So that's really our goal with this.
Makes sense.
So that's our formal presentation that we've got for you. Happy to answer any questions you might have, hear any opinions or thoughts you have on the process, anything like that.
That was very informative.
Yeah, very.
Yeah, a lot of information. And
Yeah.
you have the report to go back to, and obviously we're available at any time to call if you have questions come up later on.
And I would like to just add on this project, our commissioners know what our budget looks like, our regular road department operating budget. We're roughly $4 million. And that is to cover all of our regular maintenance, really nothing additional for capital improvements, just some basic fixes in some small line items for our roughly 365 miles of road that we're responsible for, and our 80 bridges and all of the tunnels. So the tunnels really are not budgeted to get any attention other than the minimal, cleaning out the ditches around them, making sure the rock fall's cleared up. This gives us an opportunity, this federal funding gives us the opportunity that costs the county nothing to take a proactive approach to the maintenance of these tunnels as opposed to a reactive approach, which is how we have to approach it. This route is vital for our community, and I think we all sort of felt that when we had the rock slide, which closed the road. Had we not received funding and been able to kind of bring that into a disaster event that was declared at the state and federal level, we most likely would have left the road closed. Tunnel 34, when the portal collapsed in 2022, there was a lot of scrambling. The only additional emergency funding we were eligible for, we applied to LTAC for their ER funds, and they capped that at $100,000. The total cost for what we did at the east portal that had collapsed on Tunnel 34 was roughly $340,000. So, this gives us an opportunity to get ahead of it and make some of these repairs before we have catastrophic failure where it's going to cost the money and we might not qualify for emergency funding at that point. So this is just such a huge opportunity for us to have this type of money to put into something that, if we had catastrophic failure at any one of the tunnels or the trestle, the roadway would just have to close. We would not be able to financially reopen that. I just wanted to put that out there publicly so everybody was aware of why we're doing this, the importance of this, and just how thankful we are to be, considered for this funding.
As far as next steps, if that's probably a good segue, is you'll notice that the first page of the concept report, the full report, has a signature sheet. So we're not looking for you to sign that today necessarily. We can have some time to look at it, answer questions, but typically at the concept level, we want to make sure that the county, Federal Highways, our design administrator, and the consultant all agree this is the way we're going to move forward. So once we get that signed, we'll probably look for that in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Then we can say, all right, we know what our scope is, and work with these guys to put hours and an estimate together to get us to the full design that's ready to be bid by a contractor. So take some time to look at it. Federal Highways has already read it and has no comments. We've already done our internal review before we brought it to you as the commissioners. You're the owners of the project, so we want to make sure you're on board with the recommendations that have been made. But at this point, we're just going to be looking for you to give it a signature, and then we can move forward.
If you have any questions or anything like that as you're working through it, let Jessica know. Feel free to reach out directly to any of us. Happy to answer any questions that might come up as you work through it.
Yeah, we're perfectly willing to consider things maybe we haven't thought of from a public use perspective, from a county perspective, and so please.
I think my biggest concern is some of these issues where keeping the historical people happy, we may be doing less repair. I mean, the mesh versus shotcrete and that. But we don't really have any say in that, do we, as commissioners?
We haven't made any promises to SHPO yet. Yeah. We had a listening session with them, and we listened to what they said. They listened to what we said. I think next step, now that we know our preferred options, it really didn't make sense for us to have any arguments or push them because we didn't know what work we were going to do. Not like in our next step, once we know what we want to do, then we'll meet with SHPO again to say, okay, we heard you. This is what we can afford. Let's make a deal type of thing. We want to support you. We want to give it a historical feel. I think they're definitely most interested in the portals. Those are fairly easy to do. I think if we can make a case for the inside that shotcrete is has the most longevity, it's the cheapest to do, that decision is not fully made. They just expressed their preference for a mesh, but it's going to be give and take. So we'll have to just work that angle a little bit, because the alternative is if they say, nope, if they give any aspect of this project, you're negatively or adversely impacting this, then we're going to do none of the things that they ask. And we're going to have to go through that process, but it's really not in their benefit to do that either, because then they're going to get a bunch of interstate gray portals. So
it's a state office too, so keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Working with the state, we're the big deal.
Yeah, it is. So it's not unique to this project. It's every project with federal funds. If we have an adverse effect, and sometimes it makes sense, and you're like, oh, I understand why. Like this tunnel, it's clearly historic, piece of our history. Other times it's like historic riprap or historic. The one that kills me is like historic rock wall along Indian Creek in Caldwell, and just some of the all the canals. Every canal in Idaho is historic because it was integral into the development of our valleys, and it's a 100-mile long resource, and you have to cross it, and it doesn't matter. It's still an adverse effect. So it's always an ongoing relationship thing. We want to go into it recognizing why they exist and the importance of it, but it's going to be a negotiation, and I think we earned ourselves a lot of goodwill by meeting with them and listening to them early before we made any decisions on the project. And so, hopefully that'll buy us some grace into, hey, we want shotcrete. This is what makes sense financially on the project. How can we make it more palatable to you? Type of thing.
It helps having the commissioners bring it up. It helps having you say that.
Okay. Yep.
And keep in mind, some of the things that SHPO might want, like the mesh, that might actually be a less expensive solution than the shotcrete. Now, you also have to factor in maybe long-term maintenance of that cost,
Yeah.
right? So it might in the end be equal, but that's a decision we'll have to look at. We'll have to just look at, okay, if we could do a little bit more and get 50-year life out of that mesh and add a few more elements in, maybe that's a bigger benefit. You know,
Because they don't want this to go away. At the end of the day, that's what we told them. Like, if any of these fail, no one will see these tunnels. And so that's really the conversation we tried to have, is help us protect these resources.
And I like to say this, you guys do make the final call. You bring a lot of information, a lot of ideas and how it could, but ultimately, it's your project.
And it's just time. It's time and some money. You know, it's actually not that expensive to go through the process, but it can add 1 to 2 years to the design to get through an adverse effect. So, you know, given that our funding is in 2027, if that makes us push that funding, you know, that just everything adds risk. So it's, do we want to, for the cost of, you know, probably less than $100,000, probably more like $50,000 to get through all the paperwork and everything, is it worth risking the entire construction budget? You know, so that's what we're going to be balancing. You know, what's their list, or what's their line that they do not want to cross? And then, you know, how does that impact the overall stability and risk of the project?
Yeah, and the cost of doing the process might be $50,000 or $100,000, but who knows what inflation looks like?
Yeah.
If over that 2-year, 3-year period that the project gets pushed out, if it's like inflation was the last 4 years, then we've got a 25% deficiency in our budget, right? So that's part of the reason that we're trying to get to a no adverse effect.
It's a great point. I mean, our costs just from when this was originally estimated back in 2022 to now were roughly, I want to say, 40% higher. We had the year, if you remember, 2022 to 2023, that was almost 25% inflation, just that year alone. So every year we put this off, we have to take off items off our list. So.
Right. Okay. Any more questions, Commissioner?
No.
Well,
Thank you for
That
the
was
detail.
one of the better briefings that we get.
Yeah.
Good.
Awesome.
Very good.
Free money is nice. Like,
money.
it's the best kind.
Right when I
I know.
hear that
Yeah.
there's no cost to the county.
It changes your whole attitude in looking at it, right? That's why I wanted to say it at the very beginning, because it's free to you. So that's the best kind.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Jim.
Yes.
Thank you, guys. Thank
Thank
you for
you.
You're welcome.
shepherding the process.
Mhm.
Thanks, Public Works.
Jessica's doing a great job. I work with counties, cities, highway districts across the state, and you've gotten a lot of experience at this point with emergency projects, Western Federal Lands projects, bridge projects, Little B projects. Shoshone County's done a good job of going after all the available funding with the limited budget that you have. So I enjoy working with Jessica and the county, and Stephanie. Thanks.
And Stephanie.
And Stephanie.
Yeah.
That's not an aside. It's and Jessica and Stephanie. Yeah.
All right. Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you very much.
Yeah.
We're-
Thank you both for your time.